Everybody. Good morning. First, a little comment about the Dyson this morning. I really appreciate that all of you showed up in that compressed time. It was totally selfish on my part. I wanted to be able to get a walk before it got too hot today. Um, so that's what I did with that extra time is went walking. So I thank you all. But it's not to my liking, frankly. That's kind of what you got today is kind of more traditional Dyson. And it's very much the way Steph did Dyson. You came in, presented your koan, you were right or wrong, hit the door, Wasn't much conversation, wasn't much and it was Margaret's style that involved more conversation. I've talked about that before, and I've kind of inherited that. I've probably actually taken it a bit further. And yeah, I think part of, if I think about it, I think part of the reason that Tyson's were intended to be terse was to cut off intellectualization and overthinking. And you had to come in, bam, lay out your response to the koan, you're right or you're wrong, next person, you know. And so, and it also sort of raised the level of anxiety. It was like, oh, you gotta come in, gotta get your answer out, and you're either gonna get the what was that thing, the gong show? You're going to get the gong, or you're going to get, go on to the next go on. Anyway, but I don't like it, and I will try avoiding that as best I can. But who knows, through the rest of the summer, what's going to happen? And that's on my mind this morning. I was reading something from David Loy, and many of you know of David. He's a Zen teacher. Look at those guys, they're wearing coats. Oh my God. Okay. Anyway, so David is very concerned with the ecodharma and the environment, and so that got me thinking. I went out for my walk this morning, and where I'm situated here, okay, the one side of my property I talked about is my wonderful neighbors Ben and Audrey, very deeply a young couple who are very deeply connected to the natural world, um, and who go to the great lengths to be um, environmentally friendly. I get that's the right word. But on the other side, there's a farm. Okay. No, there's not a farm. There's a huge hay meadow because the farm is not located here. The farm is someplace miles away. And I don't even know which farm that hay meadow belongs to or who the farmer is. Never met him or her or them. And what was significant on my walk this morning is that they've been expanding this hay meadow by devastating the forest. They just clear cutting the forest. Acres and acres of land are being clear cut to expand this hay meadow. And you may say, well, that's not horrible. It's not, yes, we're losing those trees, but at least it's not going to be a housing development or something really destructive like that. But it got me thinking about the whole cycle of what's going on there. That farmer, I don't know him or her, probably him. The farm is miles from here. I know where the farms are, and I can imagine which one it probably is. And they're huge. I mean, even here in Maine, Yes, we have our little organic farmers, but agribusiness is very present. And so this is not a little family farm. The idea was a kind of a little family farm, and mom and dad ran it and the kids helped out and all that. This is agribiz. It's big. I don't know how many cattle he has in his herd, maybe 500, maybe 1,000. I don't know, way beyond the capacity of the farm family to run it. So he has immigrant workers, um, Latino workers. I don't know where they're from. They haven't been visited. Usually, I would see them when I went to the store. The guys are in there getting sodas or whatever. But of late, I haven't seen them, and I don't know whether that's because they aren't here anymore, or because they're simply keeping a low profile, and avoiding being deported. I don't know. That really not the point of my story so much as to say agribiz, which now farms in New England are dependent on immigrant or migrant workers. This because Native Americans don't want to do this work. Who wants to be in the barn at 4 a.m. milking cows continuously for 4 or 5 hours, and then doing other work, field work or whatever during the day, and then repeating that cycle again at 4 p.m. until, whatever, 7, 8 at night. You get out of the barn, you go home, you fall in bed, and you repeat the next day. But and so that's happening on the human end. And on the environmental end, the forest is getting taken down to create more meadows. And again, maybe not the most destructive thing. But what's going on? It's that farmer, if you asked him, he has millions of dollars of assets. He has big barns and big tractors and lots of land all over the countryside and so on and so forth. And my guess is that he's probably broke or close to it. He's working to service the debt on all of that in the hope that he can get far enough ahead in his lifetime that he'll have something to leave to his kids. So to me, it speaks to the insanity of the cycles that so many of us are caught in these days. The hungry ghost cycles. Following the premise that that farmer has been taught that more is better, and if you could just get enough, your life will get easier and you'll be able to service your debt more easily and you'll have something nice to leave to your kids. That's an illusion. And what often happens, I don't know about this particular farm or this particular farmer, just that they keep going. They keep going. Well, if I only could, get those trees down and get more hay out of that land, I could put in another 30 cows and maybe that would push me over the top. And it goes and goes and goes like that. Now, that's really not a comment on farmers. It's a comment on our culture. Because probably most Americans are living their lives in that way. Trying to keep up with the debt, trying to, satisfy ever-growing demands and struggling to do so. And simultaneously, I have weather pop-ups on my computer, and which I thought was a good idea, because I thought, well, if there's ever some kind of a weather emergency, I would be advised. But as it is, 99.99% of the time there are no emergencies, but they've got to sell ads somehow, so they pop out of little things about all sorts of things that are not particularly important. But today was an interest, it caught my eye. The Eiffel Tower has had to be closed because of excessive heat in Europe. Extraordinary. Places in Spain and Portugal are hitting 114, 115 degrees. And I was reading, even in the UK, they're getting into the 90s, and like RJ's like, well, we get into that before breakfast. But the fact is that only 5% of the people in the UK have air conditioning. So the 90s there, people are suffering, maybe dying. So we have these contrasts, right? I mean, kind of coming back to David Lloyd's thing, you know, we have these contrasts of insanely pushing ahead as fast as we can, taking down forests as fast as we can, and the planet is getting rapidly uninhabitable. And they're also having fires in Southern Europe, right? Massive fires like we have over here that tend to go with that heat. So the insanity of it all just really struck me this morning. It's like, how do we even begin to extricate ourselves? Well, for those of us who are Zen practitioners, it starts with being awake. It starts with paying attention, right? It starts with recognizing that these catastrophic things are happening. And of course, in the terms of the Zen peacemaker model, with not knowing. We don't know what the solutions are. We don't know where this is going. We don't know, you know, so we have to observe. We have to pay attention, which segues into the next part, bearing witness. And to me, bearing witness is not just noticing or paying attention. It goes beyond that. It's acknowledging it. In this moment, acknowledging things are crazy, things are out of control. And by the way, while this is all happening, we are erasing environmental regulations as fast as we can. And so we're standing on the end of the cliff and somebody's saying, well, this cliff isn't high enough. Let's go up to the next cliff. So we have to pay attention. And we have to acknowledge what's happening. It's happening all around us. I mean, some of you have been here. I live in a beautiful rural spot. Quiet. Hasn't been quiet the last couple of nights as people have been celebrating the 4th of July. Get me started on that. Okay. I will start on that. You know, we have a priest in our lineage. He was a student of Bernie Glassman's. Oh, his name isn't going to come to me right at the moment, but who was a Vietnam vet. And he had been a door gunner in Vietnam, and one of the very brutal, sadistic things that we did at that time was to count the kills, and he had over 100 confirmed kills, and he's someone who's just tormented by his experience in the war. But to get to the point, the fireworks are so disturbing to him that he would leave the country on 4th of July not to be anywhere around those explosions and things. What's his name? Does anybody know? It's just not coming to me right now. He's written a book and stuff. Anyway, yeah. Bernie ordained him as a priest, I guess, as a priest. And when he had the ordination, it was done in Poland. Bernie had successors in Poland, and so they had a first issue, I guess, and so he's where he did this service. And then this guy walked to Vietnam from Poland. Just enormous demons that were pursuing him that he lived with. How did so I got there somehow. But bearing witness to this moment is tough. It's not easy. By any stretch of the imagination, things are really insane. And yet Zen says we can't close our eyes. We need to pay attention. We need to bear witness. It breaks my heart when I walk past where they've cut all those trees. They just mowed the forest, and they come, those who they have these giant Feller Buncher machines that have giant shears, and they literally shear off the trees at their base, and then an arm comes down, it grabs them, picks them up, puts them on the back, and off they go. That too, logging isn't what it isn't a guy out there with an axe or even a guy out there with a chainsaw. It's now massive machinery. No humans on the ground. So what do? We bear witness, and then what? We could get depressed. That's always an option. We could despair. Popular these days. But I don't think Zen allows us that. Right? Because we now come to the third stage of that model, respond with loving kindness and compassion. We don't have the self-indulgent luxury of despair. If we take Zen seriously, then we have a responsibility to respond with loving kindness and compassion. how do we do that? Well, in this moment, I can't speak for anyone beyond myself. But as I understand that, we have to be willing to open our hearts. We have to be willing to feel the pain or the confusion or the doubt or the insecurity, all the complex emotions that arise when we really allow ourselves to confront reality, or to allow reality to confront us, however we want to put that. And sometimes that sucks. There's an expression in AA, we thought we could find a softer, easier way, but we could not. Well, Zen is not the softer, easier way. Because it asks us to engage with the world, with whatever is happening, whether we like it or we don't like it. Right? No matter how repugnant it is, we need to be, in the first instance, aware. We need to bear witness, and then we need to respond. Again, how do we respond? I don't know. I do know this. I see a lot of people these days posting fuck this and fuck that. That's not responding with loving kindness and compassion in my definition. But there's a huge tendency to get pulled there. I don't know about you all, but I get angry a lot. I see things that are happening and I get really angry. I get really angry when I see those trees down. Acres and acres that are now nothing but stubble. But I know that anger is not the appropriate response. That's not loving kindness. That's not compassion. Who do I have compassion for? Do I have compassion for the trees and all the woodland creatures that are displaced because of that massive clear cut? Do I have compassion for that farmer who's caught in a cycle of consumption that will hold him trapped until the day that he dies? Is that as far as it goes? Do I have compassion for the consumers who are buying the milk, who are finding it harder and harder to pay for, to give their kids adequate protein? As many Buddhist teachers have pointed out, these chains are interconnected and they go everywhere. So if we're going to open up and allow ourselves to feel not just compassion, but a certain amount of empathy, a certain amount of love. We've got to open our hearts, and we've got to set our egos and the demands and needs of our ego aside for a minute. That's probably the fundamental flaw in the world right now. I think more than ever, we've enshrined the individual ego and the needs of the individual above all else. Not what the community needs, not what the nation needs, not what the world needs, not what the many beings need, what I need. I'm the filter, my little small self. My entanglement in the three poisons: greed, hatred, and ignorance, the three Buddhist poisons. We're all entangled in those to some extent. Because once I have an ego and I am important, then everything else kind of falls into perspective as either at least secondary or even antagonistic to my needs. So this Dharma is not easy. Because it's calling for that profound transformation where I set aside the needs and desires of what some teachers would call the small self, the ego self, and trying to open and awaken to a greater discourse. And how do I live my life in connection to that? How do I deal with the realities of my neighbors who are caught in these cycles, these destructive cycles? Of society. Our entire society is now thoroughly embroiled in these destructive cycles. That's not a question I'm going to answer. I think my job as a Zen teacher is just to simply point out that we need to be awake, and if we are awake, we need to respond. We need to be part of the healing. We need to be part of the solution. We need to be part of the loving and caring and compassionate activity in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Uh, I think I have kind of an example of a real life example of what you're talking about and bearing witness to. Um, and yesterday I received a forward from someone, and it was a Substack article by, I think, Tim Hayes. Anyway, he listed what are going to be the long-term, the most dangerous long-term effects of Trump's presidency. And then he had a list, international relations and checks and balances, and there's the list. But he said, but none of these can compare with the worst part of what's happening today, of what we are bearing witness to. And I have it here in front of me. He said, to me, the saddest and most damaging thing that I see Trump doing to the country is getting American citizens to dislike each other so much. And I just, with all the disasters going on, I just had not even thought about that. But uh, where I live in a condo and across the canal slipway is a whole wharf full of fishermen. And during uh, the election cycle, many of the fishermen flew the big Trump flags. And for the 4th of July, uh, many of them had American flags, were all over the place. And some of my neighbors were speaking dismissively of, look at them over there flying those American flags, and being quite angry with the fishermen without kind of seeing the bigger picture that, maybe the fishermen feel that way about us too at 4 in the morning when we're sleeping and they're going out fishing. Um, so I can pull myself up to see a bigger story. But then I also talked to a neighbor, and we have two staff people here who are from Togo, and they're very sweet men. Um, and many members in the community are really uh, close to them. And they are fearful that they're going to be picked up by ICE. And it's so my heart, of course, goes out to them. And it's hard not to connect being picked up by ICE with the people who were over there waving their flags and waving their Trump flags. And, don't you know what you're doing? That these people, these good people, are suffering. Ah, so as forgiving as I want to be, then uh, or maybe not forgiving, but inclusive, bearing witness. Um, then I see it be those beliefs being played out in a way that is just so hurtful for other people. And um, it's bearing witness to a lot of people's plights that are occurring in this world. And I don't, it's hard to know exactly what to do. But one thing that also struck me, and then I'll finish up, I not too long ago read the book On Tyranny by Tim Snyder. And it was very, very interesting, small book, just kind of going through the signs of authoritarianism and danger signs. But one of the things that he said in what there is to do about this is really surprised me. He said, when you pass people on the street, smile and say hello. Um, and I really liked that in a book that was otherwise pretty dark and kind of overwhelming as to what we can do. And then to have that small piece of wisdom that, of course, we've talked about so many times, but to see it in that context made me realize how profound a message it really is. So that's my example of what you're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's kind of interesting because it seems like with all the hate, it seems like the protesting and stuff. I mean, it doesn't influence the people on the other side to change their minds. If anything, it just makes them feel more strongly. So that seems like really good advice to just smile and say hello. It seems like it may not be that much in a way, but there may not be anything else we can do, and at least it relieves the suffering from the hate a little bit, and that is a lot given the alternative of nothing. So yeah.
Also, this idea of smiling, it's funny, it's like um I feel like another response, a resonant response is a smiling to the natural world. So, we're here and the smell of the ocean has changed. Things are changing, radical transformation where ocean's heating up aggressively and all the phenomena have to readjust and uh various lives are dying um to be replaced. Um Smiling, smiling at the miracle because on a mega level, eh, everything is transforming, and that includes the people who are desperately trying to find an equilibrium or adjust or compensate or cope or whatever, just like the ocean. Everything is trying to emerge. And so the smile is also a kind of question of faith. So for me, when I look at the ocean and I see that things are changing, I remind myself that new equilibrium is being established. It just isn't one that I am comfortable with, that I envision, that I expect. I expect starfish to survive. Maybe they won't, but who knows what'll happen next. Same with humans. We expect humans to be um, comfortable and eat and not get incinerated. Um, we- but what's happening is the truth. This is you know an evolving universe. And smile to that. Smile to human love. Um, and whatever happens next. Just saying.
You know, when you was talking about that, Deborah, yesterday I heard another piece on NPR. Maybe some of you heard this about Paris, about people swimming in the Seine. And it was this wonderful thing. The first time in 150 years or whatever it is, people are able to swim in the Seine again. And then they had a water quality expert. Oh, it was on BBC News. So the BBC, they were interviewing this guy who was and who's actively involved in testing the water from the Seine. Well, comes to find out, they're still dumping sewage in the river upstream, and there is fecal matter coming downstream where everybody's swimming. But there's some days when it's like low enough it's okay to swim. Some days it's kind of and some days you can't swim. There used to be an expression, we are all downstream.
So the smile is compassion as well as some kind of being in love with the miracle of the flux. I don't know. It's that's what's true. It's true. We're in a flux. As particular human beings, we don't like where the arrows are pointing.
We don't like what? I'm sorry, I didn't.
Where the arrows are pointing. I
Oh.
mean, we make our own connections, and it doesn't look so good for our uh, ideas about what it's supposed to be like, especially for us.
Well, I don't ever want to minimize the power of smiling either. I mean, a smile can be very powerful. And I think it's connection. When we meet people one on one and we smile, that's like our humanity greets their humanity. And almost no, I mean, there's a few people that are just so curmudgeonly that they won't respond, but I would say probably 99% of people will respond back and smile, or, how are you? Have a good day. And we're we're meeting one another's humanity, not meeting across a political barrier or something like that. That's the other truth about what's going on in the world is people are reacting via media to symbols, not to the reality, not to one another's humanity, not as part of a great community, but to symbols. Conservatives, bad. Liberals, bad. You know, all of these kinds of notions that frankly are perpetuated by media. But when we can confront each other as human beings one on one, it's a totally different relationship.
Trump was going on and on the other day about how he hates Democrats, just hates Democrats. He used the word, he hates them. It was going on and on. So, smiling in that environment is really an act of rebellion in a way.
Well, it isn't. I mean, his script is one of divisiveness. He thrives on the division. He thrives on the anger. He thrives on the hatred. I think he's not the only one. I think that's how he keeps going. Frankly, I don't know how he and I are virtually the same age, and I don't know how you can do no exercise and eat Big Macs all day and drink Diet Cokes and still be alive at this age. But unless you're so consumed by the anger that it just, it, it, I think we can be sustained by anger just as we can be sustained by love.
And he also tapped into a large group of people who are very angry, and many of them for very legitimate reasons.
Yeah, well, yes, many legitimate reasons are legitimate, and in a certain way, I mean, those fishermen that you talk about are no different than my farmer. They've bought a certain thing, work hard, buy your boat, blah blah blah, and you're going to be able to have a comfortable life. And then, these environmentalists come along, and all of a sudden you can't take as many fish as you used to take, and so on and so forth. And you're struggling to make the payments on your boat, and you're, as you say, you're out there. I heard the boats go out like at 3, 4 in the morning. So you're out there busting your butt, cold, icy days, whatever, hauling in a catch, and then having virtually nothing to show for it at the end of the week. But and just like that farmer, they've sort of bought into a certain myth, certain mythology that says in America, if you work really hard, blah blah blah, you're going to have a certain level of success, and it's not there. So they're angry and resentful because they've followed the script. They've worked hard. They've busted their butt. They've done all the right things, and they've got nothing to show for it. Why shouldn't they be angry? And that makes them vulnerable to demagoguery. But back to your smiling. The only way across that barrier is compassion, is the smile, is meeting one another on a human level. If that's possible. I don't know. sort of in conclusion, this is the fundamental gap that we need to cross as human beings, as a society, as a world. How do we come together to collectively solve problems rather than to create new ones and say, fuck you? That's if we cannot accomplish that task, we are done for. And I think as Buddhists, we have great responsibility to engage in that question. How do we come together? How do we heal? How do we hold each other in loving kindness and compassion? The fact that others may fail at that doesn't give us an excuse to fail at that. I don't think we can underestimate, in those, some of you know, in 2017, I joined a group of clergy that we went to the border wall on the Mexican border outside of San Diego. And there were clergy there. We were a big group of clergy from all over the country. And our intention was simply to go to the wall and pray, meditate, whatever, just kind of, and just kind of bear witness, be there. And we were confronted, not by ICE agents, these were customs, what are they called? No, Border Patrol agents, fully militarized, carrying the shields and the helmets and guns, automatic weapons. Right? We're a group of clergy. There were nuns and priests. There were, and they came at us and they shoved us back, and it was fairly terrifying. It was more than fairly terrifying, So that's the other thing, where do we start to dig the humanity out of those situations? I looked into the eyes of those men quite deliberately, and I could only see humanity in one, there was only sort of one man. He met my gaze, and sort of we acknowledged one another's humanity. They've been trained to not respond as human beings, to not have the normal emotions. So it's hard. It's incredibly hard.
Oh, I'm sure we all have examples of the difficulty of this in our lives. So I live on a dirt road, and a mile above me, it becomes a class 6 road, which is, an impassable dirt road. Though some young people with their big trucks and big tires they get through. And above that is a land that's owned by a lumber company, and it hasn't been harvested. The trees haven't been harvested for, I mean, I've been here, oh geez, I've been here like 36, 37 years. No one's harvested the wood. And one of my neighbors who's kind of lived here forever said they don't bother with that now. It's too small. And so there's a lot, and beyond that, there's a tremendous amount of conservation land. And so it's pretty protected. Um, so at the very top of the road, there was a falling down house, and some um, friends of mine, Scott, his name is, he started the land trust group in Francistown, and he bought the place, built a house, and he put 70 acres behind him in conservation easement. Um, so that's protected. And then in the house below that, which had been abandoned for years, a young couple bought it. It's only, they have 4 acres, but they have cattle. Um, they have, maybe 5 or 6 cattle, and they have a donkey and a horse and all that. I mean, it's a little farm, horses. Um, but he's just cut down all the rest of his trees to create pasture for his cows. This isn't going to be a big operation. And they have the sign out by their house, "Don't tread on me" sign. And they're probably the only people on the road um, that kind of adhere to that sort of principle. And I can't imagine not being anything but pleasant or kind to them. And he stops his truck, and he'll stop and talk to me, and they have a year-old child and all that. And I might not think the same way they do, but it wouldn't occur to me in this little community neighborhood to not be kind and pleasant and all that. Then I live in a town that has about 1,500 people, and there's a store, a little store, and the people that took it over, oh gosh, I'm going to say 5 or 6 years ago, because it was, I don't know, it was before the pandemic. They were, anti-maskers, didn't, hold anybody to the wearing a mask in the store kind of thing. And it felt very non-community, because, in my mind, being part of a community is you want to protect the people that are in your community. And, I wore a mask. It didn't stop me from going. I wouldn't let it stop me from going there. Though you didn't, no one did too much shopping during those couple of years. Um, but then they kind of got on the war path about some property that the father owned in town, and he wanted to build a house, and it was too near the wetlands, and there was a huge, big, you know, fight about that. Went on and on. I had to go to the committee at the Capitol and all this other stuff. But ultimately, but at the time, the guy that owned the store um, would go on Facebook, and he would record these videos of himself in the store talking about how terrible the conservation commission, was, and the conservation and the planning board not letting his father do this. And it just created so much angst in the town. And then on election day, I was helping at the polls, and they were outside. The owners of the store were outside with their Trump signs. And, the videoing stuff that was putting people in town down was just too much. And a lot of people stopped going to the store, including me. And I just, I just wonder about whether I'm doing the right thing. It's really hard for me. I mean, I don't like what they're doing. Um, and, I don't know for my own self what's right for me to do. Should I go to the store and smile? I had family here last weekend. One of them was from San Francisco, and they stopped on the way here at the little store. And my, friend from San Francisco said, "I've never been in a store where they sell ammunition right on the counter where you check out." It's just a really difficult situation for me, and I make such an effort to smile. I'll see like a big motorcycle group in town, and they'll be stopped in front of the horse sheds, and I always wave and smile, and I want to be that way, but this one has got me really stuck. So there I am.
Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, well, to a greater extent or lesser extent, we're all stuck, and who knows what's right in these situations. It's easy. I think it's easier to know what's wrong. Okay, we know it's, all the don't tread on me stuff and, kind of ter territorialism or tribalism or whatever we're going to call it. Divides us and allows us again, you know, I don't imagine, maybe I'm wrong, that they don't like you, Kathy, but they don't like liberals. Again, they're dealing with the symbology. They're dealing, um, with what they hear, and somewhat, to some extent, okay, government is interfering with their selfish desires. We don't live in, this is not 17 whatever, where you can do whatever you want because it doesn't bother anybody else. We're all intertwined, we're all interconnected. And so our lives have impacts on others, and therefore we have to have restrictions to some extent, right? And and when people come, and I'm the same way. When I come up against a restriction, I don't like it, and I might have some resentment about it. But that's part of our living in community. That's part of our being a society, is that we have, certain rules and restrictions that we need to, comply with. So, and I don't know. I don't know how you deal with that. I don't know how you deal with adults in this country at this time that don't agree to that basic premise of our society, that we have to get along, and we don't have unrestricted freedom. We have never had unrestricted freedom. Maybe since the, I don't know, early colonization or something, but that's the, was it Locke or Rousseau that talked about the social contract? Doesn't matter. But we have a social contract. We have to live within certain rules if we're going to live with each other. But that seems to be in dispute currently. I don't have answers. I don't know how to deal with that. I certainly don't have an answer to your situation, Kathy, but I think our obligation is to try. Our obligation is to care. Our obligation is to pay attention. And sometimes we're not going to succeed. It's hard. It's hard. Well, I'm just going to end up here. The day is getting on, and I'm sure folks have things they want to do. But when I think about when I first started practicing Zen, that was in the early '80s. I don't think these issues came up then. He's like, oh, you can go sit on your cushion. You have a nice quiet practice. I don't think the world was impinging in the same way. Or at least it was easier to ignore it. And it's getting harder and harder to ignore. You can't go to the little country store without it rearing its head, or, whatever the situation is.
I have to just add this little thing. Gary wants me to shut up, but just a little bit. It seems so sad that we have been brought up with the idea that voting is a great thing, that we're in a democracy and our vote counts and da 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 da. And this is a good example of Kathy's, that in a sense she's trying to vote. People are trying to vote by not going to that store. Somehow we think that expressing our opinion and showing in a peaceful way, but showing our vote is good. And yet it's almost as if the idea is one should vote and then let go. But I mean, it seems, it's to me, it just feels like a kind of perversion of this idea of having one's voice heard, that it ends up being hate. It ends up being divisive. It ends up being people can't really hear the other opinion. They just hear that, the enemy. So it's sad, problematic. And I know it's late, so probably shouldn't. Anyway.
No, well, no, you have a good point. And I think it's somewhat an issue of scale. If you boycott Starbucks or Target or, nobody takes that personally. But if you boycott the little store in town, the people who own that little store and their friends and their neighbors take it personally. It deepens the gulf, So do you help things by avoiding that store? Or does that increase the tension, increase the anger and the fear and the division? So scale comes into play on a lot of these things too. And if I go to Starbucks, my barista is not the head of the corporation. I can't engage in that at any level. I can smile all I want. That barista will smile back, but in Starbucks corporate headquarters, that has zero impact. But if I go in the store and smile, maybe I'll have an impact, a tiny one.
Well, thank you. I think I'll go to the store.
I was just going
Wear
to
your
add,
rock suit.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah,
wouldn't it be nice if we were all local and we could all get together and go to the store?
that's right. I could bring a whole gang in.
Yep. Laughing and smiling and
Right. Yeah. Well, when before all this happened with the video and putting down the members of the planning board and all that other stuff, publicly, I always went in and smiled and, talked to the women and all that. The only thing I ever bought in there was sliced cheese because I'm not really interested in the rest of the stuff they sell. Um, and uh, eh, but then this whole thing happened with the video that was just really crushing hard for people who, these people, everybody volunteers on these committees. It's a work of love, really, what they do, and they're trying to protect the environment and to be so badly talked about. It's hard for people. Um, and, a lot of those people are friends of mine. So I was, feeling, a loyalty to them because they all stopped going to the store that I needed to do that. But I think I'm thinking about it differently after hearing everyone. Thank you, everyone, this morning. Thank you, Peter, and everyone else who commented and everybody who listened. So I'll let you know how my project goes. Thank you.
Well, and at least you'll have a convenient place to get your ammo.
Right. That's right. All right.
Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.